Hi, I'm Ellen from the ODK team, and we just released ODK Central v2023.5. That release makes it possible to update entities from submissions, and I'm putting together some examples. I'm going to record myself putting those examples together, and this is going to be really raw, it's going to be long, I'm going to make mistakes, but hopefully it will also be a good learning experience for all of us. As a quick reminder, entities are a way to represent people, places, things, anything that you care about that you want to follow up with in your workflow. They are at the same level as forms, and so they can be shared between forms. Up to now, you were only able to create entities through form submissions, but you were able to edit them through the central front end. You could basically represent any workflow that way, but it would require often having multiple entity lists or having your entity lists represent events rather than true things. If you're not totally sure what I'm talking about, I'll try to make that clearer when I go into the examples. We have a lot planned for entities, and so I'm sure that we'll have new tools to make the kind of workflow that I'm going to demonstrate today even easier in the future. So that's why I want to be clear that right now we're at v2023.5 as I'm recording this, and the functionality that we have available is entity creation through form submissions and entity updates through form submissions. That's the new part. Okay, so with that kind of background set, let's see what we're going to build together. I've put together a scenario here that is intentionally very generic and I think applies in a lot of different contexts. At a high level, let's imagine we have a community group that wants residents to report problems and staff members to address those problems. And let's say that we already have a solution in place that's using paper. We have community members who can get paper forms from the office. When they see a problem, they can go ahead and fill out one of the forms they have, drop it off at the office. Then a staff member picks up the stack of forms from the inbox. The staff member goes through and kind of looks for forms that they can address. Say, oh, I can address this problem. They take the paper form with them. They go address the problem. They fill out maybe a bottom section and they put the finalized form in the outbox. And so, you probably recognize this. There are workflows like this in a lot of hospitals, in schools, sometimes at town levels or city levels you can see this. So it's a very common kind of thing. I asked our good friend ChatGPT to draw a picture for us, and this is what it came up with. So, we can all visit the inbox building if we want. Okay, so let's go ahead and start building this. And I just want to take a moment to mention this kind of writing down what the ideal workflow is part of building forms is really, really important. And, here this is kind of a toy example, so I've written it out very briefly, but for real projects, this can really be, I would say, the hardest part of developing an ODK form or a set of ODK forms is really making sure that the requirements are clear, that the right problem is being solved. But we'll work off here this very simple workflow. And again, because it's an example, I reserve the right to modify it as we go if I change my mind. Okay, so I'm going to do this all in Google Drive. I have a folder where I put the scenario. And I'm going to start by putting together the problem reporting form. So I'm going to create a new Google Sheet, and what I'm going to do? I want to do a new from template. Yes, great. We have this XLS form template that we've shared recently that I think is really helpful, and I've made it into a template for my organization. You can do the same. So here, I'm going to select the ODK XLS form template that's in my template gallery. If you don't know how to do that, just look for Google Sheets template gallery, and most other spreadsheet software has a way to do that as well. Here, let's see. I'm going to make sure that this font size is big enough. So here we go. This is my XLS form template that I have made a copy of by going through the Sheets template system. And the first thing I like to do is make sure I have a good file name, otherwise I get pretty confused. So this is not actually the template file. It's a new file in the Town Problems folder that uses the template. Okay, so this is going to be called Report a Problem. That's going to be the first form's name. While I'm here, I might as well make sure that I have the right title for my form. And so I'm going to use the same title that I used as the file title. I'm going to call it Report a Problem. And I'll just give it form ID Report Problem. And notice that when I use the template, the version gets updated automatically, periodically, so I don't have to do that myself. Instance name, I'm going to come back to, so that's going to be the name of a specific submission. I'm not sure about that yet. I think I'm ready to start building the form. Okay, so I want community members to be able to report problems. This is a very kind of toy example, and so maybe what I'll start with is just ask for the title for this problem and a description of the problem. Maybe that's all I need for now. So text, let's call it problem title. I guess what do we want to prompt the user with? We can say briefly describe the problem, and maybe we can say let's see, keep this as short as possible. We could also put a constraint, but I'm gonna start with this. Okay, so let's do a problem title, and yes, this is going to be required because there's not much point to reporting a problem if we don't know what it's about. And then we are going to also give an opportunity for the user to give a broader problem description. So we'll say add more details. Maybe as a hint, we'll say, when does the problem occur? Are there any like special conditions to make the problem happen? You can see that I'm a software person. I'm thinking about software problems. But anyway, you can imagine that depending on your specific context, you might have different things that you want to have be part of the problem description. Sorry, that was just something that Google Sheets wanted me to pay attention to, but I don't need that right now. Okay, so this should also be required. And then maybe the last thing that we want to do is to capture a location. And so let's do that with a geopoint question, and we'll do that problem location. Where is the problem? We'll make that required, and what we'll do is make this have the placement map appearance so that the user can actually move the marker and accurately select where the problem is happening. Maybe they're not exactly there when they do the report, and that would be fine. Okay, so I don't know, this looks like enough for a problem being reported. So at this point, I think I'm going to go ahead and add to my instance name, and I think I'm just going to make that problem title. So when we get a new submission, whatever the user set as the problem title, the brief description, we're going to use that as the instance name. It really would be good to have a constraint, but I don't want to have to think about how many characters would be appropriate right now, so I'll leave that as an exercise for someone who wants to go a little bit deeper. I'm going to adjust some of my column widths just to make this a little easier to read. And I think I'm ready to try this out. So I'm going to download this as an Excel file. So this is one of the downsides of using Google Sheets, is that you do need to download it and re-upload it, but I find that it's worth it. And then I'm going to go to Central so I can try out this form. So here we are in Central. I've got my one project called Town Problems set up. I'm going to go ahead and go inside of it and start a new form. Okay, so I'll just choose one and I'll go ahead and upload that. So here, didn't make any mistakes that the form converter could catch, but there could still be things wrong. Let's see, I could test this with the web preview, but I think because I know that I'm going to use ODK collect for this, I think I'm going to go straight to testing on collect. I've got ODK collect on a physical device and I'm mirroring it in Visor so that you can see what I'm doing. And so I'm going to use the QR code for the draft so that I can try out my form. So here we are in the draft project. I'm going to start a new form and report a problem. So briefly describe the problem. Let's say that we have a broken bench. And then I can add more details and I can say back right leg has rotted. And the other legs need to be painted too. Where is the problem? So where is this bench? Here I'm going to select some look. I'm not sure where I am. I'm, for development, I often use a location spoofer, and so I'm going to long press maybe a little ways away from me because maybe I didn't record that right away. So you can see that here, I have a new point showing the location where I saw this bench. I'm going to save this point, and then I can make my submission. If I look back in Central here, I should see that submission. The title is Broken Bench, it gives me my little description, and I have the location here. Great! So this form looks like it's working as we want. Now we're getting to the interesting part. So we know that residents, community members can report problems, so that's that first part of the workflow. That was a straightforward form. We got it working. The interesting part is we also want ODK to help us do the second part of the workflow, letting staff members address those problems. So now we need information to go from that incident reporting form into some form that's going to allow staff members to pick up one of these problems and to address them. So how are we going to do that? You may have done that kind of thing with form attachments, right? You may have taken things like the reported problems, downloaded a CSV, attached it to the form that's going to let staff members address the problems. That works great, but it requires some manual work or writing a script. What entities do is help automate exactly this kind of connection in between forms. And so what we can do now is think about when we have a reported problem, what's the thing that we want to later on be able to follow up with? Clearly the thing is a problem. So let's take our existing form and register problem entities so that then we have them available for the later form. Now, some people may find it easier to first design the follow-up form and then add entities to everything. That's totally valid. For me, I find it a little bit easier to, at this point, think about, okay, what are my entities going to be? And then once I have that in place, to design the follow-up form. But either way is completely valid. All right, so here we're back at our form design. And so we know that we want to register problem entities. The first thing to do that is to go to our Entities tab and to tell the system what we want these entities, where we want these entities to be created. Basically, we're naming the list of these entities. So here we know we want to have problems, and that's going to be the entity list on Central, and it's going to be the name of the entity list that we use in the follow-up form as well. We need to give a label to each of these entities. And in this case, I think we just want the problem title. That's going to be the same as the instance name that we set in the settings sheet. And that's going to be pretty common, especially when we have short little forms. They are separate, and you may have different ones, especially if you have a really long form that does things other than just manipulate entities. But for now, so we want to do problem title. There we go. So that's all you really need to create entities. So now this is going to create a problems entity list on Central. Every time a submission for this form is going to come in, it's going to create a new entity, and it's going to use the problem title that the user specified to give a label to that entity. In a lot of cases, that's enough. The system also creates a randomly generated unique ID for each entity. And again, often that's all you need. In this case, I do think we need to save a little bit more information because we asked our community members to provide a description of the problem and to provide a location. We're going to need those for follow-up. So if we do want to save more, then we need a save to column in order to specify the names, the property names that we want to use on the entity. That's not in the template by default. It's described over here in the additional columns sheet. So this is here, if you think, there's something missing in this template, it might be described right over here. So save to is the first one on the survey sheet. When you're adding some of these additional columns, you have to decide where to put them. I often find it helpful to have the save to right kind of over here, but the downside of that is then you can't copy and paste from other forms that use the same template. So when you create a template for your organization, if you know you use entities a lot, maybe you add the save to column to your copy of the template. For now, for this demo, I'm just going to go ahead and add it to the end. Save to. Okay, so now here I put property names on the entities that are created from this form that I want different fields to be saved in. The problem title is already saved as the label, so I don't need to save it separately. The problem description I do want, and I think I'm gonna call it details. So when I have a problem, it's going to have a label property and it's going to have a details property. That makes sense to me. The location, I said I also want to save. I think it would be helpful to be able to show these problems on a map. Maybe staff members have a particular region that they're in charge of, so that's a really nice way for them to filter out the the problems that don't pertain to them. So in order to be able to map entities, we need to use the geometry property name. This is a kind of well-known property name that allows mapping. So I'm going to set that here to geometry. Great. So I think that's it. This form could have a lot more in it, right? It could have a drop-down for problem type. It could have a lot more specific questions for those different problem types. So there's a lot that we could do just within this form. But I think for this example, this is enough. All right, so let's go ahead and try this and make sure that our entity declaration works. So in order to do that, I'm going to come back to Central. This was the test that we just did. I'm going to upload a new form definition. Here we go. Here is the new version I just downloaded. Okay, so I don't really need to test the form because the logic hasn't changed. What I really need to pay attention to here is whether the entity list information is as I expected. So this says that an entity list is updated by the form. Good, we expect that. Problems is created. This is going to be a new entity list. Perfect. and it says that there are two properties involved, details and geometry. That looks great. Now, it doesn't explicitly say it, but there's also going to be a label and a unique ID. Every single entity, every entity list needs to have those. So those are required. Okay, so now I've sort of done what I can in this draft context. I need to publish my form in order to be able to try entities. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And actually, I think if I go to testing, you'll see a little warning here saying, okay, if you're using entities with a form, you are going to need to publish the form and try it there. So a common pattern would be to use a test project for verifying multiple forms that are connected through entities. And we have a really nice guide now up on form testing that you might want to check out if you're interested in diving deeper there. So let's publish this draft. Again, it's going to repeat everything that it's doing. That looks good to me, so I can proceed. Okay, there's my report a problem form. So I want to try the entity creation. And in order to do that, I'm going to need a well, I guess I could use the web form, but I want to do it through collect, so I'm going to need an app user. So I'm going to go back to forms, app users. I'm going to create a new app user, and I'm just going to call it test, so it's really clear that submissions I'm creating right now are just for testing purposes. Okay, I'm going to scan that in, and let me show you what I'm doing. I'm going to replace the draft because I don't, the draft doesn't exist anymore. I've published it. So I'm just going to reconfigure with QR code. This is something that I like to do that I find helpful. I'm going to scan in that client QR code. And so that's going to leave me now with the Town Problems project. There's not going to be any form if I start new form, so I need to make sure to go to form access settings and to allow this app user called test to have access to the form. Okay, so now I can save, start new form, refresh, and there's the report a problem form ready for me to report a problem. Okay, what kind of problem is there now? Hole in sidewalk. My dog fell in. Where is the problem? It was over here that I found earlier when I was walking. And we go ahead and send. So now we've made a real submission to this published form. Let's go see it inside of the form here. In submissions. So there is the submission that we made. And if we look at the details of that submission, we should see that it created an entity. So the entity is called Hole in Sidewalk. It's in the problems entity list. If we want, we can go see it, so we can jump directly to it here. And we can see the entity data, so the properties that were saved here on the left, and some information about when that entity was created, what caused the creation of the entity, so the submission, and so on. Okay. Now that we're here, we can go see information about the problems entity list. So here it is. We're at the list of entities. So far, we've only registered one problem. If we go to overview, we see a little bit of information about the different properties and the different forms that are related to this entity list. All right, so we've got one form and we've got one entity list. Great. Now we're ready to create our follow-up form. Let me do that also in Google Drive. I'm going to create a new Google Sheet. Same thing, I'm going to use my template. Here is our XLS form template. And same thing I did before, I'm going to go ahead and rename this immediately so I don't get confused. So we have report a problem. I like to name my forms, especially when there are entities involved, in a very action-driven way. So basically what we're doing is building an application, right? And different forms represent different actions that can be taken. So we have report a problem. Now I probably want to do something like, what is it? Respond to problem. Let's do that. Respond to problem. That's going to be the title of my file, and I'm going to set the form title here as well. Respond to problem. Form ID will be respond problem. I'm not sure what my instance name will be yet. I kind of have to start designing the form in order to figure that out. So we want to respond to a problem. Where do we start? So when I'm doing this kind of follow-up form, I find it helpful to start by getting a listing of all of the entities that exist in the system. And we had talked about how it'd be helpful to view those problems on a map. So let's do that. So to connect an entity list, we always use select one from file. And the name of the file that we are attaching is always the name of the entity list, so in this case problems, .csv. So central is building a CSV file of all of the entities that have been registered, and we can attach it to any form that we want, including, by the way, the registration form. So if we wanted to, for some reason, well, actually not for some reason. Yes, we should do this, right? The report a problem form, it'd be very helpful if it showed problems that already exist so that people aren't constantly reporting the same problem. So I probably won't do this in this work session because this is already getting very long, but it's a great idea, a great reason that we might want to attach an entity list to a form that also registers new entities. Okay, so I've attached my problems to the respond to problem action, and we'll call this problem, right? Select a problem to respond to. And we want this to be shown on a map, and so that's going to be the map appearance. Unfortunately, there's also a maps appearance for GeoPoint, so it can be a little confusing, but this one I know is map. This is required. Why would we fill out this form if we don't select a problem? So we select a problem that we want to respond to. What do we want to do? Let's see, we probably want to show some information about the problem. I happen to know that when you see the map, you'll get to see all of the entity properties when you click on different entities and different problems. But I also think once you select one, it'd be helpful to get a little summary below. So let's do that. Let's see, in order to get the values from this problem that we have identified, we're going to use calculates. The entities, the properties that we have available, remember, are label, details, and geometry. We probably don't need to display geometry. That will be kind of taken care of in the map view. But it would be helpful to see the title and the details. So let's do problem title, and then that's going to be a calculation. And in order to grab values, the values of properties on a particular entity, we are going to use list lookups. So we have a nice sheet here that describes how to do this. There's a little bit of complexity in the way to express this. So look at this, do some examples, and hopefully you'll be able to write your own expressions. So let's see, we want to do instance problems, that's the name of the entity list, root item, that's some kind of defaults that we need when we are filtering an entity list specifically. That could change depending on what file attachment we have, but almost always if you're attaching CSVs, actually, if you're attaching CSVs, it will always be root/item. Okay, and so that's saying, again, take the problems entity list. Each item in there, we want to filter in some way. And so in this case, the filter that we want is that we want the name. That's what ODK uses to represent the unique ID for an item in an attached file. We want that unique ID to equal the unique ID that was saved in the problem form field. So when we select an item from that problem CSV, we are going to be saving in the form the unique ID for that problem. And so this lookup here is saying, take my list of problems, look at each item, find the one whose name is the same as problem, okay, and then give me the label. Okay, so again, I know it's not the friendliest syntax. We've talked about possible ways to simplify that. The nice thing about this, though, is that it's the same for choice lists, for attached CSVs, for repeats. So it's very powerful. Once you understand how to write these expressions, you can query anything in your form and in attached data. Okay, so let me do the next one here. I also want to get details, so problem details. And I'm going to do the same thing. So once you've written one of these expressions, you can kind of just copy and replace what you need. So again, same thing, we're looking at the same problem, but now we want to get the details property. Here it is. So we've pulled out these two properties. I think what we want to do is probably display them. So let me do a note, and I'm going to call this problem note. And I'm going to say title colon problem title, and I can't remember this. Yeah, alt. So on a Mac, Option Enter gives you a new line. I'm not exactly sure what it is on Windows. Probably Alt Enter. And then details, problem details. So that'll give us a nice little readout. Now, if I leave it like this, we'll have this note on a separate screen as the select, which would be fine. But to make it a little bit nicer, I'm going to make a field list here. So that's a begin group with appearance field list. So a field list is a list of fields that appear on the same screen. Okay, and group. There we go. So that should allow me to select an entity from the problems list and show a little bit of information about them, about that entity, sorry, that one entity that I selected. I think now's a good time to try this form. File, download, here we go, and I'm back to my town problems project. I'm ready to create a new form. I'm going to drag in the respond to problem file that I just downloaded, and uh-oh, I made a mistake. So on row 2, question or group with no name. Indeed, what was I doing? Forgot to put a name here. I'm going to call this group entity. It represents the entity and its properties. Okay, so I'm going to download this again. And get my new version on, and hopefully this time we got all the errors. Here we go. Okay. And something interesting here. So we do have a form attachments tab. So you can see that Central identified that I had attached a CSV using select one from file, and it went ahead and linked to the entity list problems, which is exactly what I want. Great. I'm going to test this form the same way that I did the other one, just to make sure that the logic works well. Because I already have one entity created, that will be accessible from this test. So I'm going to in collect I'm going to add a project to just get in this test QR code, start new form, respond to problem. First question is select a problem to respond to. And as we expect, we have a button to select the place that shows a map. And we can see here that we have one location that is available to select. Now, the markers are very similar to the Google Maps marker, so if I was doing this, I'd probably select a different base map, or at least make sure that people who are using this form know that this color is what they're looking for. Here we go. There's one issue. As we expect, it's hole in sidewalk. We can see, I was mentioning that the name is a unique identifier. You can see it here. It's not very attractive, but it is unique. And we also see the version of this entity, which I'll come back to a little later, and the details that my dog fell in. I'm going to select this entity, and this is going to bring me back to my entity group, and I'll see that the title and the details are now filled in. Hooray! This is kind of magical to me every time. I know it's going to work. I know how it works, but it's really cool to see this link between forms, I gotta say. I think that's all we have right now, so that works. That's great. I verified that my selection works, that the connection between the connection to the entity list works, and that all of my queries are correctly written. Great. So what do we want to do next? Well, we want to enable the person who's responding to the problem to say what they've done and to mark the problem as either completed or maybe needing some other attention, right? So I think let's do exactly what I just said. Give the person who's responding to the problem an opportunity to write out what they've done and then ask for the current status. Okay, so let's do a text field, and we can call this action taken. Describe the action you have taken. This is required. Like I said, it would be helpful to change the status of this problem. And more specifically, and this is where we're going to tie this into updates, it would be really nice if problems that have been taken care of are marked in some way or maybe filtered out of the list. So by changing the status here, capturing that in this form and updating that on the entity, we are going to be able to do that. So I think, just like I said, we want to have two possible statuses that we can set. So we're going to use a select one. We're going to call the list statuses, and we'll call the name here status. So in my choice list, I'm going to create a list that's called statuses. And we can say that the problem is either addressed or needs follow-up. So two options here. Okay, what is the problem status after your action? Great. And if we want, maybe we can put this in a field list as well. This is very, whether to put something in field lists or not really depends on your field team and what they prefer. Some people really like the ability to focus on one question at a time, and so it can be very helpful to have one question only on a screen. Some have really long devices and they kind of prefer having a little bit more information. So I think this is a decision to make in conjunction with the people who will actually be using the tool. In this case, I'll just show what it looks like in a field list. So definitely for demos, field lists kind of look better, but sometimes having each question, or actually I would say often, having one question on per screen is more usable. Okay, so, whoops, what did I do? Begin group. I need to give it a name. Let's call it action. Not action taken, but action. Hello. Okay, here we go. All right, we also want to make this required. Okay, again, I'm going to try this logic out, make sure that I didn't mess anything up. Upload new form definition. Here it is. Okay, so back in collect. Let's see, this form should have updated. I use my little update arrow to do that. Respond to form. I select my problem, so I still only have one problem. I select it, describe the action you have taken, filled, whole. What is the problem status after your action? It's been addressed, I filled it, send. Great, so I'm just gonna check to make sure that the submission looks good, the form submission here. Hole in sidewalk, my dollar, yeah, filled whole and addressed. So it can feel redundant to get this information again, we already have it. So let me show you how you could just put your expressions directly in your notes if you prefer. So these were two calculates. Here's the expression. So I should be able to put the problem title here, the details over here, and whoop, make a space, and remove these two rows. Let's do another check to make sure that that works. Okay, I'm going to come back to collect. Again, when I start new form, I'm going to do a refresh. I should have uploaded my draft. I can select my dear pothole, describe the action that you've taken, filled it, addressed, next, send. And so now we should see that we don't have this redundant information anymore. So it's totally your choice. So you might find it more helpful to have that again in the submission, or you might just find it extra noise. You can decide which you prefer. But the important thing that this form captures is the action taken and the status. This is great, but it doesn't do what I mentioned earlier, which is to allow us to filter out the problems that have already been addressed. So let's do that. How are we going to do it? Well, before Central v 2023.5, we would have to do something like maybe have an addressed problem entity list and store the entities, store the problems that have been addressed in that list, and then filter them out of the selection here. The expressions are hard to write for that, and it's a lot more to kind of think about and manage. What we can do now is we can write the status to the entity. So here, when we ask the user for a new status, we can write that to the entity, and then we can use that status to do things like filter out problems that have been addressed. Let's see what that looks like. So again, I'm going to go to my entities list, and I'm going to specify the name of the entity list that I want to have some effect on. It's going to be the problems entity list, the one that I already have. I'm not going to use the label. Actually, I don't even want to have that column anymore at all. I'm going to delete it. Because what I want to do is update the entity, what I need to do is I need to specify the entity ID that I want to do the update to. We haven't yet added this information to the additional columns sheet. So I'm going to go in the docs and look this up to make sure I'm doing the right thing. So using ODK Central, managing entities. And so here we have updating entities from forms. Okay, a little bit of background information. And then this tells us how to build a form that updates an entity. So the important thing is we specify the list name, we've already done that, and then we need to specify the entity ID. Okay, so let's do that. Entity ID. And the entity ID is the ID of the entity that has been selected. So which field holds that? Well, remember, it's this problem field. So when we do a select, the value that we save in the field is the value of the name, which represents the ID of the entity. So in the entities sheet, I'm going to say, use the value of the problem field to look up which entity needs to be updated. Great. The next thing we need to do, and this is necessary when you're doing an update, is you need to specify which fields, which properties on the entity get updated. This is done the same way as when we save entities, as when we create entities. So we're going to add that save to column, and then any of these form fields that we want to save to the entity, we are going to give a name in this column. So I think the really important one is status, and I think in this case we just want to call that status as well on the entity. Great, so that should be enough to save the status to the entity that has been selected. Let's try it. Okay, so this shows me that an entity list is updated by this form, which is what I want. Great. It's updating the problems list. And if I see details about the properties, I can see that only the status property, which is added by this, this draft, and then when I publish it, this form, is the only one that's being updated currently. And that sounds great. That sounds right for what we want to accomplish right now. Okay, so in order to be able to see that the status gets updated by this form, I need to publish my draft. So again, when we actually use entities, when we modify entities, we need to do that on a published form. There isn't yet a way to have kind of draft or sandboxed entities. We have to do it on a real published set of forms. So I'm going to say proceed, and then the most important thing is I need to give my test app user access to this new form so that it can see both of them, both of the forms that we've created. All right, so back to my Android device here. Let's see that we can see both of those forms. I need to leave this draft project, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to delete it so I don't get confused. I've already published the form, so this draft doesn't exist anymore. I'm back in my town problems project for my test user. Great. I'm going to start a new form, make sure that I refresh, and I have the respond to problem form. Great. So let's respond to a problem. I'm going to select a place. Here it is, a hole in the sidewalk, and I'm responding to it. I have filled it in. It is fully addressed. Let me send it. So now, when I go to respond to problem, I should see the submission. And if I see the details of that submission, I should see that it updated the entity. Great. And this shows me that the status went from empty to addressed. And so this form submission that I just made successfully updated the status of the entity. Yay! Wonderful. So what can we do with that? Well, lots of things, but most important to our scenario here, this is going to allow us to change which problems are displayed based on that status. So let's do that. We need a little bit more work. If I go back to Visor here and show you, if I do a new form submission to respond to a problem, sorry, let me discard this update so you can see this is the latest version. I'm going to respond to problem. I'm going to select the problem. And here is going to say status addressed, but really we don't want it to be in this list at all, right? It's not one of the problems that we want to have a response to anymore. So we would really like that to not show up in the map. So I'm going to show you how we do that. Back to our form definition. Okay, so this is where we define which problems are selectable. And so I bet you have ideas, right? How do we filter choice lists? If only we had a way to filter choice lists. Well, we do, right? And that is choice filter. Same exact choice filter that you are already familiar with, okay? And so I think in this case, what we want to filter out our problems that have already been addressed. And so the choice filter, we write an expression that says which ones we want to keep. So we want to keep the ones where status is not equal to addressed. So this should look very familiar. Again, same thing that you would do if you had a choice list on the choices sheet or if you had attached a CSV manually. That works with entities as well. Okay, so if the status is not addressed, we just don't want it to show up at all. Let's try it. Whoops, I did not want to put that in the parameters column. I wanted to put that in the choice filter column. Okay, let's try it. All right, so that shouldn't have made any changes to the entity list in any way, and it looks like it doesn't. To be able to try this, I am, well, actually, no, I could do it as with a testing QR code because it only changes accessing existing entities. So I could do that if I wanted, but I find it, once I have a test app user, I find it confusing to go back and forth between these drafts and the test app user. So I'm going to just go ahead and publish my draft immediately and see whether or not that did what we wanted. So here is Visor, my Android device, start new form. I'm going to make sure that I refresh because I just made an update. Respond to problem. I'm going to select place and look at that. There are no problems. We've addressed all the problems. Yay! Look, again, I just find this so cool. I know it's going to work every time, but it still feels really, really powerful. We really have built this application. We've got two actions. We've got reporting a problem, and we have responding to a problem. And there's communication between those two forms, and it's happening in near real time. Let's make sure that it actually works by creating some new problems and responding to them. Okay, so I want to exit this form, and I'm going to start by doing the report a problem form again. What kind of problem do we have this time? I don't know. Dangerous intersection. Let's see. I almost get run over by people turning right. Okay, where does it happen? Right here where I am, so I'm going to place that marker right there. Okay, so that's dangerous intersection. I'm submitting it. There we go. Now let's respond to that as well. Let's refresh, and then we can respond to the problem. We select the problem, and here it is at the intersection that we had marked previously. I almost get run over by people turning right. Let's select that. And we are going to say added traffic light. I have a lot of authority. And it's been addressed. We submit this. And now, again, because we've addressed the problem, it should be gone. Start new form, refresh. And there we see that we don't have any problem to respond to currently. So the fact that that problem was addressed has been kept track of in the system and has led to that issue being filtered out. Now, notice that the issue is filtered out of the view, but it still exists. So we could, for example, leave it in and maybe display it differently so that folks who are about to report an issue can see that it was reported before and maybe already addressed. So there's different things that we could do, but I wanted to show you this filtering case because it's very common. One of the things we're going to be working on soon is a concept of archiving. Currently, these entities that have been filtered out are still being sent to all of the devices. And so if the system knows a little bit more about what our intent here is, which is that we don't want to see these anymore, then we can make sure that they're not sent to the devices, and that can save on bandwidth and increase data security as well, because when entities are on devices, there is more risk for them, that data being available. Great. Well, maybe there's one last thing that we can do here in this example, and that is to do something interesting with the items that require follow-up. And so let's see. Maybe what we can do is change the marker in that case. Yeah, I think that would be interesting. So let's go to documentation, and I'll show you something interesting that we can do in form design. Here's the reference, question types. In select from map, come here. In select from map, we have some ways of specifying a marker color or a marker symbol. And so what we could do for items that are needing further follow-up is we could show them with a different symbol. Let's see. So in order to do that, that will be another update to the entity. So basically we want to have a property that has the name that's specified here, so marker-symbol, saved to the entity so that when we draw that entity on the map, it uses that marker. Okay, we said we only want a special marker if we have a status of needs follow-up. So let me remind myself here what this thing is called. So needs follow-up. Back to our survey, we're going to do a calculate. And it's going to be called marker. This is the form field, so it doesn't really matter what we call it. What's really important is the entity property name. We're going to want to match that to the specification. So let's see, we want to do a calculation that's going to do something like if status equals needs follow-up, then we want the value to be, oh, I don't know, should we pick an emoji? This one's kind of interesting. So it's in construction, sure, that means it's in progress. Oops. So we want to have the literal text, this emoji, and otherwise, well, it doesn't matter, right? It means that it's completed, so we can just do the check mark, but those currently would not be displayed. We could have multiple cases. If we wanted, we could have a special status to say that we have a new problem, and we could set a marker in the registration form as well. So there's a lot that we can do on this idea. Okay, so let me make sure I did this right. So if the status is needs follow-up, then we want the in progress icon. Otherwise, we want the check mark icon. Okay, great. And like I said, what's really important is that we need to match the name here, which is marker symbol, when we do our save to. All right, so let me go over to my save to, and I'm just going to paste marker dash symbol. Okay, ready to try this. I've uploaded this new version, and here it tells me that there are some properties updated. 2 properties are now being updated. Fantastic. Marker symbol is a new property that's added by this new form definition version, and it gets updated by this form. Great. So let's publish our draft so we can test it. Okay. I'm going to go back to start a new form. First, I need to report a problem because I don't have one, and I'm not going to write anything sensible. Let's start a geopoint. We'll use my current location. Great. And so we are ready to start a new form. I want to make sure to refresh here so I get the latest entities. So entities do need to go to the server in order to be created and to come back to the devices. So I want to make sure that I do that. I should be ready to respond to my problem. So select a place over here. It's the place I'm currently at. I'm going to select this problem. I took some action, but it still needs follow-up. And I'm going to submit that. Okay, so later on, maybe one of my colleagues comes along and wants to respond to problems. They do their refresh, they respond to problem, and they see now that they have this little icon inside of the marker. So maybe it doesn't look as good as I expected. We should maybe use a different one. But you can see the idea that the marker's display was affected by my logic. Maybe I should also change the background color. But again, this can be an exercise for you to take on. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me in building this example. This is going to be something that we publish a tutorial based on. I'll probably do another video that's a little bit more polished, but maybe you found it useful to see me at work. If you did, and if you did find it helpful to see me making mistakes and backtracking and talking through what I'm doing, trying to decide what exactly it is I want to show, let me know. I could definitely do more of these in the future. If you didn't find it that helpful and you prefer more polished videos, that's also very helpful feedback, so please let me know. In general, again, I really hope that you found value in these entities. Like I said at the beginning, we have a lot more planned, and so I think we'll be able to make these kinds of workflows even easier to represent in the future. Any questions? Please feel free to find me on the forum in particular. That's a really good place to have conversation about these new features that we're adding to ODK so that we can all make them better together. Thank you. Bye.